So I'm reading a story from my book 12 and 2 More, 14 compelling stories, short stories about love, lust, longing and desire. And I'm going to be reading a story, The Other Woman. It was late evening. The beautiful young woman was weeping as if her heart would break. Strangely though, she wasn't sobbing audibly despite her obvious distress. The tears were simply streaming continuously down her cheeks as she took deep, shuddering breaths at intervals in between the weeping. A large 75-inch OLED curved television positioned in a focal point in the sitting room was on in the background. It provided a weirdly discordant background music to her palpable pain. She had both hands on her head, and she kept smoothing her hair back in a repetitive motion. Sometimes she would stop at the nape of her neck, and at other times she continued the motion all the way past the nape of her neck, along her jawline, down the front of her neck, clenching her balled fists under her chin, then squeezing her elbows into her chest in some kind of unnatural self-comforting embrace. A box of tissues was by her side, and she kept pulling tissues out of it to blow her nose and attempt to staunch the flow of tears. There were loads of scrunched up tissues all around her on the plush taupe-colored area rug on the floor. She had sworn to herself never again. This would never happen again. Gbenga was somebody else's husband. He wasn't hers to have, and most probably would never be. She had constantly at least tried to keep this fact in the forefront of her mind as she related with him. There were so many issues to consider in this thing they were in. What if what they were doing became public? The implications for him and for her, for that matter, was something she didn't even want to imagine. He'd most likely go home to his wife, and his wife would take him back. The wives almost always did, because of the children, they'd usually say. No more, she had said. She wanted no more of the sneaking around, being second, traveling separately, not being introduced properly to colleagues, his and hers, not being known by family and friends, his children. She had said no more to herself so many times, but she had been weak, and he, as always, had been very, very persuasive. Apart from his persuasiveness, if she told herself the truth, she needed him. Or at least she needed the things he could do for her and give her. The brand new Range Rover parked outside her luxury apartment building, the rent, phone bills, electricity bills, travels, etc. She had a good, well-paying job with stellar career prospects courtesy of him, but the cost of living these days was high. But more to the point, she had grown accustomed to this lifestyle of luxury. No matter how well paying her job was, it couldn't do for her what he could do for her. She couldn't imagine going back to what life was like before she met him. What would she do without this waist-length Brazilian hair wig on her head? She had at least 50 of them. There were the weekend trips to London just to go to the spa at the Mandarin Oriental, first-class tickets and trips on his PJ. And Dubai, that hotel, the Burj, someone had to pay for them. She couldn't. No, scratch that. She didn't want to give them up. About a month ago, he'd become a bit distant for some reason that she couldn't quite fathom. It was so unexpected and it had terrified her. What would she do? How would she cope? He would say he was coming over. She would get ready, pull out all the stops, and then he wouldn't turn up. This had happened repeatedly. Their pre-discussed signal for when she wanted to get in touch after hours was that she'd call, he'd pick up, she'd say hello, then she'd disconnect the call and then call back again in 30 minutes. This was their signal. He had said to her, "It will give me time to disengage from anyone I'm with and give you, my love, my entire, complete and undivided attention." In the almost 6 years they had been seeing each other, this had been the way their phone calls had gone. But she had noticed that for a while she would call, disconnect, then call back in 30 minutes, an hour, 2, and he wouldn't pick up. When she did eventually get to see him and ask him why, he would give some kind of non-committal answer about how busy he was and move on to something else. She then changed her strategy. She told him that she was again rethinking their relationship, and she began to be a bit more distant herself. She thought back to one of the many very similar conversations they'd had around that time. "Join me in The Hague this weekend. I have a meeting," he'd said on one occasion. "I've made arrangements for you to fly ahead of me on Thursday. I'll be coming in on the jet on Friday." I would have loved for us to travel together. He had winked at this point, a lascivious expression on his face, because they had joined the Mile High Club several times on various trips on his jet. "But Madame is coming with me en route to London." He rolled his eyes as if this was pure torture. She had responded to this invitation and others like it when she had made the decision to be a bit distant in similar ways. "I can't. There's an office retreat and I've been missing several of them. I'm gunning for a position in the office that I have on good authority is just about to be vacant." Initially, he'd indulged her. Then it got to a point when he didn't. The excuses began to infuriate him. She remembered he had even made some disquieting statements like, "I pay for your time," or "I got you this job so that you can be available for me at a moment's notice," or "Maybe we should rethink this 9-to-5 work thing." Sometimes it was, "Don't I take care of your needs? Can this job you love so much do that?" Sometimes it was various things. Just as these statements and his attitude began to give her pause, he suddenly went back to being super attentive again. He showered her with more gifts, a beautiful diamond cuff, a ticket to go ahead of him to the OTC conference in Houston, and $50,000 in her account as spending money till I get there. He resumed talk about how she was his anchor, his lifeline, the only one that truly understood him, and vague allusions to the fact that when the time was right, we will go public and there's nothing my wife can do about it. She knows it's over. And so here she was all over again, back to square one, $50,000 and an $8,000 diamond cuff richer, and saddled with a vague promise of going public, not become a wife, but going public at some undisclosed time in the unknown, undisclosed future. She burst into a fresh bout of tears, audible this time. She looked around her luxurious, expensive, and stylishly furnished apartment in highbrow Banana Island and tried to calm herself down. If these gifts made her want to stay, she thought to herself, did this mean she was in it for the money? The tears subsided a bit. "I am fond of him," she said out loud to herself, "but do I love him? If the opportunity arose, would I marry him?" The sex was enjoyable, quite good actually. For a 56-year-old guy to her 35, it was quite exciting, to be frank. He was a skilled and attentive lover. He knew how to pleasure her. She guessed experience counted for something. She'd reverted to her thoughts. Talking out loud to oneself was crazy, she thought, and giggled amidst her tears. Why hadn't she met him before his wife had? She had found out that she was always trawling through stories about him. On the internet. He and his wife had started out when he was just some lowly trainee in an oil services company. Be that as it may, the more pertinent question was, would she have wanted him if he wasn't wealthy? Would she still want him if he were just some lowly oil services trainee starting out in life? To be really truthful to herself, the answer was that she didn't think so. He had some habits that she just couldn't abide. Like the way he wouldn't take a shower in the evening when he came by to see her after work. The way he fell asleep immediately after they'd had sex, snoring like a freight train. The way that he just assumed that she could, would, and should constantly be at his beck and call. There was also the fact that he wanted her to wait on him hand and foot, quite literally. Serve his meals, full dinner service, set table and all. No informal Chinese takeaway pizza or burger meal for him. It also upset her that he didn't want her to employ a living housekeeper or cook. Too many prying eyes, he said. But he required her to clear the dishes straight away after dinner. She bet his wife had a cook. Furthermore, she'd always dreamed of marrying someone closer to her age. Someone that she could do fun things with, have the same taste in music, and have the same friends with the same diverse interests. But the flip side of this was that he may not have the money. She sighed deeply, then stood up, almost tripping over her Dior Monet spaghetti strap silk chiffon dress, another one of the perks of being with a wealthy man. She went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea. He'd said he might drop by this evening, so she needed to compose herself and tidy herself up. He always said to her, "I love being with you. You're so calm and collected. There's no drama. No, we have to do this and that and the other. You're my oasis." The operative word here, though, was might. And that was the problem. Nothing was ever certain regarding the two of them. It was another thing that she couldn't abide. If that, in his words, wicked witch of a woman I made the mistake of making my wife was so terrible and horrible, then how come his relationship with her was a probability and he was at home with his wife? On one occasion, she had heard his wife's voice in the background saying, "Dinner's ready, my love, it will get cold." He must have snuck off to call her back in line with the agreed phone signal. He had whispered to her, "Can't talk now, I'll try and be there later." And then he had disconnected the call abruptly. If he did manage to make it to her place at the end of the day, he would always go back home to her, unless they were abroad or out of the city. He told her about his wife. "We don't make love anymore." She suspected that they still did. "We only make war." "I make love to you only. You're my addiction," he continued, as if being an addiction was such a good thing. Addictions were debilitating and they had the potential to kill. It was ironic, really, cheating on one's mistress with one's wife. Then there were the Christmases, the Easters, her birthdays. She remembered how bitter she had been when he couldn't see her till 2 days after her last birthday because his wife's brother had invited them to spend the weekend at their new country home and he had refused to back out of it. It wasn't right, he'd said, as if what they were doing was. Talk about a hypocritical crisis of conscience. What about her? What about what was right for her? She really, really needed to get a life. She wanted a husband and children someday. But what man about her age could keep her in this style to which she had grown so accustomed? "Answer me that," she said out loud to herself. She stepped into her Pug and Paul kitchen with its top-of-the-range Miele appliances and made herself a cup of tea. The Fortnum and Mason oolong tea that she was partial to. She'd bought quite a number of packets on her last trip to London. As she waited for her tea, she had become lost in her thoughts. Now the tea was cold. She rinsed the cup out in the sink and made another cup. Then she returned to the living room and sat down. She continued her thread of thought about her current situation. She had thought of getting pregnant for him times without number. She had even broached the topic with him once, skirting around it one evening when they'd been catching their breath and relaxing in the afterglow of a particularly vigorous session. He must be taking something, Viagra perhaps. His response had been an unequivocal no. That isn't an option right now. She was taken aback by the way he'd said it and had recoiled from him. When he saw her reaction, he had softened a little and made one of his vague comments about when the time was right, he'd love to have a little you running around. When the time was right, he reiterated. He had begun to touch her in the right places and she had allowed herself to go with the flow and let it be. She had seriously considered getting pregnant anyway. What could he really do about it? They did use protection, but not all the time. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, especially when they were away from their base, he would throw caution to the wind as their passion mounted and say, "I really need to feel you." He liked to drag out the word feel at those times, and that really got her going. Even if they did use a condom, she could simply perforate it beforehand. He kept packets of condoms in the bedside table on his side of the bed, or she could simply collect the used one, refrigerate it, and have it inseminated or IVF later. She was not sure if that was even possible. A married woman she knew had tried it, but it hadn't worked. One of the other women had advised her to do just that, get pregnant, that is. She had said it would build an unbreakable bond and would guarantee her an income for life, or at least till the child was out of the university. That was a very slippery slope, though. A friend of hers had tried it on her married lover, and the man's attitude had changed completely and abruptly. He had cut her off cold turkey. It was unbelievable and scary. She wasn't bold enough to do that, not until she was exactly sure what his reaction would be. What were her options? The truth was that she did have options. She had a job, for crying out loud, and it was a really good job at that. She was just greedy. There, she'd said it. It reminded her of an Igbo proverb she'd heard from her mom years ago. After eating on the table, it would become difficult to return to eating on the floor, and it was so true. It would be difficult, yes, but impossible, no. Moreover, eating on the floor was relative. Would she really be eating on the floor? She reminded herself again that she had a job. It was just all these other things. She thought about his wife. She'd met her once. No, twice. They were more sightings than meetings. The first time had been at the place where she got her nails done, and the other time was in church. And yes, she did go to church. She wasn't a bad person, not really. She just really liked good things. She'd left that church after she'd gotten together with him. His wife was pretty, not beautiful per se, but quite attractive and really fashionable. She, Lilith, wanted everything the wife had and more. And she made sure that she got everything out of him, the material things at least, cars, jewelry, bags, and now she was going for fixed assets, landed property for a start. How would she get all these, the land especially, if she broke up with him? She asked herself. He had a nice piece of property at Osborne in Highbrow, Ikoyi, that she was eyeing. There were things the other women, yes, they stuck together just like the wives did, had told her to put in his food and drink. There were also things to rub on her skin and on his skin under the guise of a massage. He had told her so many times that he loved her massages. His wife never gave him a massage because of her nails, he said. There were other things they had told her about too, things to rub on her privates and to put on his when they were doing the act. She'd been told that once she did that, he would give her anything she asked for within a 24-hour period. It had something to do with the cycle of the moon. If it did work, it would be a good thing to use to get the land. She hadn't tried it yet, wasn't sure she would. She was a church girl after all. But maybe she needed to ditch that and try what they said worked. She could get the land as a final payout, then back out. Her thoughts returned to his wife and the pain she would feel if she ever found out about her long-standing affair with her husband. Maybe his wife already knew though. She'd called their home in London once with the intention of spilling the beans to his wife. Wenger had given her the number sometime in the past so that she could reach him on one of his trips. She'd called and asked for the wife. Hello, can I speak with Abby, please? This is she, the woman had answered in a cultured, confident voice. Who's speaking? The instant Lilith had heard her voice, she had changed her mind about telling and dropped the phone. This was so complicated and messy. She knew she wouldn't want her child, sister, aunt, or even a friend to be cheated on in this fashion, not to be put through the pain, anguish, and humiliation of an infidelity, whether publicly or privately. One of her friends had been going out with a married man, and when everything came out in the open and the proverbial shit hit the proverbial fan, it was terrible. The man she had been having the affair with was a prominent figure, and the story was reported in all the mainstream newspapers, the gossip rags, and splashed all over the internet. She had really felt his wife's pain and his children's pain. Was that where she was heading? Her tea was cold again. She got up to make another just as the doorbell rang. The Other Woman. A story from 12 and 2 more. 14 compelling short stories about love, lust, longing, and desire.